Going through life as an undiagnosed autistic person was inherently traumatic for me.
What felt like trauma to you is trauma to you.
Depending on how online you are, chances are you've seen posts using words in the mental health community like gaslighting or trauma. One study looked at about 500 TikTok videos and found that more than 80% of them, 84%, had misleading health advice.
Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we are having a much needed conversation on an important topic, trauma. My goal here isn't to invalidate anyone's experiences, but to break down the various ways social media, and TikTok in particular, has overgeneralized and misconstrued trauma to mean anything that causes discomfort. So what is trauma? Well, according to TikTok,
Trauma is any break in emotional, psychological, or physical safety. This can range from heartbreak, rejection, neglect, abandonment, up to abuse, violence, grief, and more. No matter your experiences, trauma survivors do not belong in boxes and should not be labeled or compared. What felt like trauma to you is trauma to you.
All right, shoot it to me straight, clear and simple. What is trauma? All right, are you ready? Anything that comes into your life that's too much, too soon, too much for too long, or too little for too long.
So before going any further, there's something I want to make sure everyone hears. A difficult or painful experience does not have to be traumatic to be valid. Your emotions are still real, and they still matter, even if the event itself doesn't meet the clinical definition of trauma. This is important because the term trauma has been stretched to cover almost every negative experience, and my goal here is to educate, not invalidate. So before getting into what trauma actually means, I want to point out a statistic from the World Health Organization. Roughly 70% of people around the world will experience a traumatic event during their life, but only 5.6% of those people, or 3.9% of people globally, will develop PTSD. So despite the majority of people experiencing some form of trauma, only a very small minority develop PTSD. Both the DSM-5 and the ICD-11, which are manuals that outline the diagnostic criteria for mental health conditions, define trauma as, quote, extremely threatening or horrific in nature. Examples include events like natural or man-made disasters, terrorism, combat, torture, physical or sexual violence, and life-threatening illness. So when a TikToker tells you,
what felt like trauma to you is trauma to you,
or that trauma is
anything that comes into your life that's too much, too soon, too much for too long, or too little for too long.
And that it
can range from heartbreak, rejection, neglect, abandonment, up to abuse, violence, grief, and more.
They're wrong. The only parts of that list that line up with psychology are neglect, abuse, and violence, and even those are constantly misrepresented on social media. For example, this is how one TikToker defines neglect.
So I was neglected as a child. In fact, I didn't even know that I had been neglected as a kid until I started going to therapy in my 20s. And my therapist was like, oh no, that's neglect. And that's why you don't know how to take care of yourself now. This form of neglect comes from like a helicopter parent who never lets you do anything by yourself. So when I became an adult, I didn't know how to cook. I would let my room turn into a disaster because I didn't really know how to clean. My bathroom would get disgusting because I didn't know how to clean it. And that is oddly enough a form of neglect. So yeah, if your parents were like always there, but now you're an adult and you have no idea how to take care of yourself, don't feel guilty. It's not your fault.
Like, does she actually think she was neglected because her parents cooked and cleaned up after her? And now as an adult, she can't figure it out, despite holding a smartphone with the ability to do a basic Google search? I'm sorry, but this is not neglect. And I guarantee that telling this to her parents would fracture their relationship. Imagine spending 18 years taking care of someone, only to have them twist it around and call it neglect.
How rude.
In this next clip, a different TikToker defines abuse, and in turn defines violence.
Emotional abuse is physical abuse. And when you understand what happens neurologically in your brain, the hormones that are released from all of your different parts of your brain to all of your organs and your glands, and how that literally pumps chemicals out into your bloodstream. And then how that actually gives you health issues over time, right? Because you have acute stress response for that immediate fight or flight that you need to avoid a situation. But with emotional abuse, what happens is that you have chronic stress, and that just continues to go and go and go, and it breaks down your organs, and it puts you in a state of fight or flight that you cannot get out of. It's on a nervous system level. So those of you that say that emotional abuse is not the same as physical abuse, it is 1,000% physical abuse.
So this person argues that emotional abuse is the same as chronic stress, and that chronic stress is the same as physical abuse because of the body's physical stress response. I could write a whole thesis on this topic. Actually, wait a minute, I already did. I did my undergrad research thesis on this. So I kind of feel insulted on both a personal and professional level by this TikTok. I mean, not like actually, but Y'all know what I mean. Anyway, I'll probably make a separate video on this, but here's the short version. The more severe the trauma, the more severe the neurobiological response. Being yelled at or overworked isn't the same as facing a life or death situation. It can wear you down over time, sure, but the neurobiological response is different. So what actually is considered abuse and neglect? The American Psychiatric Association cites the Child Abuse and Prevention Treatment Act, which defines neglect as, quote, a failure to meet the child's basic needs, with examples including not providing enough food, shelter, or basic supervision, necessary medical or mental health treatment, adequate education, or emotional comfort. Physical abuse is defined as, quote, purposeful physical injury of a child. So not neurobiological injury from stress, but like actual physical injury. And the definition for SA should be pretty self-explanatory, but if it's not, it's up on the screen if you want to pause and read it. Also, I thought it was a little strange when this TikToker said,
Trauma survivors do not belong in boxes and should not be labeled or compared.
Isn't she the one labeling people and putting them in boxes by calling them trauma survivors? Why is it okay for her to inaccurately label others as survivors and put them in that box, but it's not okay for someone to point out that things like heartbreak or rejection aren't clinical trauma? They're just part of life. They can be difficult and painful and often require time to heal, but that pain doesn't have to come from trauma to be justified. When social media misuses these terms, it inevitably spreads misinformation about what they really mean and what things like trauma responses actually look like. For example,
Trauma responses that people don't realize are from Trauma PT1. Apologizing constantly, never being able to apologize. Overreacting, underreacting to certain situations. Feeling alone even when surrounded by a lot of people. Being worried about what other people think about you. Constantly needing constant reassurance.
these are very broad symptoms that overlap with a lot of different mental health conditions, from depression and anxiety to, yes, in some cases, PTSD. But none of these symptoms on their own are a trauma response. Everyone is different, and when we start labeling broad symptoms as trauma responses, we risk pushing people into labeling every unfortunate experience as trauma, which can strain relationships with family and friends and drive someone deeper into mental distress.
Lesser known sign you have trauma. Finding yourself wishing you had trauma.
So just like the last video, this isn't a sign of trauma for most people. Usually when someone wishes they had trauma, it's because they feel invalidated about their response to a certain experience that doesn't quite meet the clinical definition. But you don't need to go through a traumatic event for your pain to be real. Your emotions are still valid. Even if something isn't clinical trauma, your feelings still matter. Okay, so FYI, we are now entering cringe territory.
Apparently, if you close your eyes and let your body move to the music, your trauma shows.
This is an example of the mockery TikTok has made of traumatic experiences. Obviously, this isn't true. And even if it were, what exactly is this guy's trauma supposed to be? Being embarrassed after making a fool of himself? Is that what we've reduced trauma down to? Awkwardness?
Proof I'm traumatized. Watch my eyes. My breathing becomes very shallow. And there you go. I'm dissociating.
I really don't know why this person felt the need to prove to TikTok that she's traumatized, or how this video would somehow be considered proof of it. She's literally just sitting still and staring at the camera. For all I know, she's crashing after pulling an all-nighter with a 6-pack of Red Bull. Like, seriously, go to bed, fam.
This is what CPTSD from narcissistic abuse looks like. Shaking is a trauma response and trauma. Tremors are very real and hit when we least expect it.
You'll notice her phone isn't shaking, right? Only her right hand is. And given the way she's holding her phone, the recording should also be trembling, and it's not. So she really thought to herself, what would make a good TikTok? And decided to fake a tremor for pity points. If this were an actual post-traumatic physiological response, it wouldn't be limited to one hand. Her whole body would be shaking, and making a TikTok would be the last thing on her mind. There isn't a single PTSD reaction that can be turned into a TikTok aesthetic. It's a debilitating disorder that forces you to relive a horrifying event over and over. Even when you're safe, your mind and body don't necessarily understand that. It can distort your reality and make you react in ways you never imagined. There is nothing glamorous about it. So aside from trivializing the very real and serious experiences that qualify as trauma, what other impact does this trend have? Well, when Donald Trump signed an executive order banning federal funding for anything tied to diversity, equity, and inclusion, the National Science Foundation started flagging certain words as possible DEI when reviewing research grants. A leaked list includes the words trauma and victim. This means researchers studying trauma who receive NSF funding could be flagged and potentially lose that funding. All because the word trauma has now been lumped in with the political misappropriation of diversity and inclusion. And this isn't the first time the misappropriation of trauma has sparked a political response. Back in 2019, Donald Trump Jr. released a book called Triggered: How the Left Thrives on Hate and Wants to Silence Us, where he argued that the American left has a so-called victimhood complex. But do y'all know where the psychological use of the word triggered actually comes from? PTSD and trauma research. Yet, the term became so misused that Donald Trump Jr. slapped it on a book just to roast the left. What started as an effort to destigmatize trauma and promote mental health awareness has instead led to the dilution of what trauma and PTSD actually mean, and that only creates more stigma and less awareness. Alright y'all, that's it for today. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like more content like this, don't forget to subscribe so you'll get notified when new videos come out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.